Hey guys, welcome back to Real Talk Cinema. This is your ultimate destination for deep, detailed movie breakdowns where we don't just recap, we dive into every frame, every twist, and every hidden layer behind the story. Whether it's action, drama, thrillers, or fan favorite classics, we bring you long, immersive storytelling that uncovers the heart of each film. So grab your seat, stay tuned, and let's explore the cinematic world like never before. This is Real Talk Cinema, where every story matters. Hey guys, welcome back to Real Talk Cinema. Let's dive even deeper into one of the most haunting and life altering moments in KO 2025, the fatal knockout that didn't just end a fight, it ended a man's life and shattered another's soul. Bastien steps into the cage that night not as an underdog or a reckless brawler. He enters as a man at the absolute peak of his career, the embodiment of controlled violence, a world champion who has meticulously crafted every movement, every breath, every inch of his body to be a perfect weapon. His hands are wrapped tight, his jaw is set, his eyes burn with the cold precision of a professional who's done this countless times. The stadium around him is an ocean of flashing lights, roaring fans, camera shutters, and national anthems, all building up to this singular moment. For Bastian, the cage is home. It's where he feels most alive, most certain, most powerful. But what he doesn't know is that this night, this fight, will become the day that tears his life apart. The bell rings, and what unfolds is nothing short of breathtaking. Bastian dances around his opponent Enzo, reading his moves, predicting his angles, striking with the confidence of a man who has never doubted his own fists. The choreography of the fight is beautiful, the kind of fight that makes crowds rise to their feet and chant his name with unrelenting passion. But then comes the punch, the one that lands just a little too perfectly, with just a little too much weight, at just the wrong angle. Enzo's body stiffens, his legs betray him, and he crashes to the mat with a sickening thud that Bastian feels all the way through his bones. In the split second that follows, the crowd erupts, but Bastian doesn't throw his hands up in celebration. He doesn't smile. Something in his gut tells him this isn't right. This isn't normal. Something is terribly, horribly wrong. The camera zooms in, capturing the growing horror on Bastian's face as he inches closer to Enzo's still body. The noise around him begins to fade, muffled like someone has plunged his head under water. His breathing grows louder in his ears. His heartbeat thunders like a war drum, drowning out the shouts of the referee, the calls of the paramedics, the chants from the crowd. The world around him seems to collapse in on itself as he kneels beside the man he's just killed. There is no dramatic music, no slow motion hero shot, just raw, suffocating silence that pierces deeper than any blade could. The director holds the shot on Bastian's trembling hands, on his wide, glassy eyes that refuse to blink, on the beads of sweat rolling down his temple as he comes to terms with what he's done. The entire scene is stretched out in agonizing detail, forcing the audience to sit in the unbearable weight of this tragedy, not as spectators, but as if we are sitting right there in the cage with him, gasping for air, crushed under the same guilt. For Bastian, this moment doesn't just kill Enzo, it murders everything Bastian thought he was. His championship belt now feels like a shackle, his fists like weapons he can no longer trust, his body a machine he can no longer control. The title, the fame, the victories, they mean nothing now. The fight was supposed to be another page in his story of greatness. Instead, it becomes the moment that erases him. What makes this point so devastating is that Bastian's guilt doesn't come from rage, recklessness, or malice. It comes from the crushing truth that he was doing exactly what he was trained to do. He wasn't sloppy, he wasn't out of control. He did everything right, and that's what makes the tragedy unbearable. His sin was not making a mistake. His sin was being perfect at something that kills. From this point onward, Bastian's life spirals into a self imposed exile. He leaves behind the lights, the cheers, the money. He isolates himself in the cold, suffocating silence of a salt mine, a symbolic graveyard where he willingly buries the fighter inside him. He punishes himself every single day, as if carrying heavy loads in the mine can somehow balance the weight he feels on his chest. His body is still strong, but his spirit is fractured beyond repair. He becomes a ghost of the man he once was. The fatal knockout becomes the beating heart of KO 2025. It is not just a backstory or a plot device, it is the living, breathing wound that shapes every decision Bastion makes, every punch he throws, every tear he refuses to shed. The echo of that punch haunts him throughout the film, not through flashbacks alone, but through the way he clenches his fists and then lets them go, through the way he flinches at the sound of a crowd, through the way he stares at his own reflection, disgusted by the warrior staring back. This is the brilliance of KO 2025. It doesn't let the audience escape the depth of Bastion's guilt. It forces us to walk with him, to feel the unbearable weight of accidental destruction, and to question whether a man can ever truly forgive himself for taking a life, even if it wasn't his intention. This is not just the beginning of his story, it is the unrelenting ghost that follows him to the very last frame. After the life-shattering moment inside the cage, where Bastion's fatal knockout stripped him of his identity, his career, and his peace, his story takes a lonely, painful turn toward exile. Bastion does not simply walk away from the MMA world. He runs from it as if he is trying to outrun the ghost of Enzo, as if distance can erase the blood on his hands. But what makes this part of his journey so deeply tragic is that there is no place far enough to escape the weight of guilt that now suffocates his soul. Fame, glory, recognition, none of it matters anymore. Bastion rejects everything, tearing himself away from the lights, the headlines, the championship posters plastered across the city that now feel like cruel reminders of his personal ruin. The salt mine becomes his self-imposed exile, a place where the cold earth and suffocating silence mirror the crushing emptiness inside of him. The film captures this environment with painful precision. The walls of the mine are damp and tight, the tunnels narrow and unforgiving, the sound of each footstep echoing as if the mine itself is mocking his loneliness. The salt clings to his skin like the past clings to his soul. It is not just a place of labor, it is a living prison, and Bastion willingly sentences himself to it. He does not hide here out of fear of public backlash. He hides because he cannot bear to face the man in the mirror. Every shovelful of salt, every crate he drags, every pound of rock he lifts feels like a desperate, pitiful attempt to physically carry the emotional weight he cannot put down. The routine of the mine is brutal, repetitive, and suffocatingly silent. Bastion wakes before sunrise, his eyes hollow, his movements mechanical, his life reduced to a cycle of punishment. He does not speak to anyone. His co-workers move around him like ghosts, aware of his presence but untouched by his sorrow. There are no conversations, no laughter, no connections, just the endless clatter of tools and the rhythmic collapse of his own resolve. Even when surrounded by people, Bastion is utterly, devastatingly alone. The salt mine is not chosen by accident. It is a place that strips a man down to nothing. The air is heavy, the ground is treacherous, and the salt burns the skin, slowly etching itself into every pore. The environment itself becomes a character in the film, a constant reminder that Bastion has buried himself alive. There are no posters of his past here, no fans screaming his name, just the raw silence that screams louder than any arena crowd ever did. In this graveyard of salt, he tries to sweat out his guilt, as if the physical agony can numb the emotional one. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Bastion's exile is that it isn't forced upon him. No one drove him here. No mob chased him out of town. This is the punishment he chose for himself. His guilt is so deeply rooted that he believes he does not deserve the comfort of redemption, of peace, or even of death. He does not seek forgiveness because he believes he is beyond it. In his mind, this life of isolation, this endless labor, is the closest he can come to atonement. The film uses this portion of the story to force the audience to sit in silence with Bastion, to feel the ache of his routine, to walk through the damp, endless tunnels where light barely reaches. The camera lingers on his exhausted expressions, his trembling hands as he struggles to lift yet another load of salt, his eyes that stare blankly into nothingness. It becomes clear that Bastian is not surviving. He is merely existing, waiting, perhaps even hoping that one day the weight of his guilt will finally crush him completely. The salt mine is more than just a workplace. It is a physical representation of his emotional burial. Every corner is a coffin, every tunnel is a grave, and Bastian has voluntarily buried himself alive, sealing himself off from the world, because in his heart he believes he no longer has the right to walk among the living. But what KO 2025 masterfully shows is that no matter how deep you bury yourself, life has a way of digging you back out. The arrival of Emma at this bleak turning point reminds us that Bastian's story is not done yet, that somewhere in the shadows there is still a chance for redemption, no matter how much he wants to run from it. Just when Bastian has nearly vanished into the cold, endless rhythm of his self inflicted punishment, a figure from the past finds him in the darkest depths of his exile. Emma's arrival in the salt mine is not just a plot progression, it is a collision between unbearable guilt and unimaginable grief, a moment where the past refuses to stay buried. When Bastian first sees her, covered in the grey dust of the mine, she does not appear as a woman seeking revenge. She is a mother on the verge of collapse, a soul who has already lost everything and now teeters on the edge of losing more. Her presence is a seismic rupture in Bastian's carefully constructed isolation. The visual storytelling in this scene is piercing. The silence of the mine is broken not by shouting or anger, but by the echo of her footsteps approaching him from behind. A sound that Bastian hasn't heard in years, someone willingly coming toward him instead of away from him. His body freezes. His hands, rough from endless labor, suddenly seem useless, hanging by his sides as if the weight of the shovel is the only thing anchoring him to the ground. When he turns to face her, the camera captures the unbearable weight in his eyes. A man expecting the rightful wrath of the woman whose life he destroyed. But what Emma carries is not wrath. It's something far more heartbreaking. It's desperation. Emma's face is carved by grief, but it's also driven by a flicker of stubborn hope. The hope that Bastian, the man she should hate more than anyone, is the only person who can save her missing son, Leo. Her voice is steady but heavy, the kind of voice that has been rehearsed in countless sleepless nights, the kind of voice that has no room left for pride or revenge. She tells Bastien that Leo is gone, swallowed by the underworld of Marseille, pulled into the labyrinth of crime and violence where boys are forced to fight for survival in illegal cage matches. She does not beg, she does not plead, she simply tells him the truth. She has no one else. This moment cuts deeper than any punch Bastian has ever taken. Emma's arrival is not just a reminder of his guilt, it is a test of his humanity. Bastian, who has been hiding in the mines, believing himself to be a monster unworthy of redemption, is suddenly handed the chance to do something good, something selfless, something that might not erase his sins, but could, for the first time, allow him to step out from beneath their crushing shadow. And yet, his immediate reaction is one of paralysis. How can he save anyone when he believes he is the one people need to be saved from? The brilliance of this scene lies in its quiet restraint. There are no dramatic music cues, no sudden flood of emotions, just two broken people standing in the cold silence, carrying scars neither can articulate. Emma does not offer forgiveness. She does not say she understands, but her decision to seek out Bastian, to entrust him with the life of her child, speaks volumes. It is not about trust, it is about desperation. And perhaps, buried beneath that desperation, is the smallest seed of belief that even the most broken man might still choose to save instead of destroy. For Bastian, Emma's request is not just a mission, it is the last bridge between who he is and who he might still become. Her words ignite something in him that the salt mines could not bury, a flicker of responsibility, of purpose, of the chance to finally fight for something that isn't his ego or his career. But accepting her plea also means stepping back into a world he spent years running from. It means facing the brutal streets of Marseille, the criminal networks that devour children, and most of all, it means facing himself. This scene is a masterclass in layered tension. On the surface, it's a simple ask, a mother searching for her son. But beneath it is a profound exploration of grief, guilt, and the fragile chance for redemption. Emma's visit does not shatter Bastien's exile, it unearths him. It pulls him, almost against his will, toward a path where he might finally find peace, not by escaping his guilt, but by confronting it head on. And so, with Emma's desperate request lingering in the cold air, Bastien is forced to make a decision that will shape the rest of his journey. Continue hiding in the mine until the weight of his past crushes him completely, or step back into the world and finally fight a battle worth fighting. For someone else, for Leo, for Emma, and perhaps, in the smallest, most fragile way, for himself. When Bastien decides to leave the salt mine and return to Marseille, it is not the triumphant return of a hero. It is the hesitant, reluctant march of a man dragging the heavy chains of his past behind him. This is not a return to glory, it is a return to the battlefield where his soul was first broken. The salt mine, for all its suffocating silence, had become a place where Bastien could hide, where his self-punishment could be endured in isolation. But Marseille? Marseille is alive. It is chaotic. It is a city that remembers him not as a man, but as a ghost, a cautionary tale of violence gone too far. And now, it is the city where a boy's life hangs in the balance, a boy that Bastien must find if he ever hopes to outrun the shadow of the man he used to be. The film paints Bastien's return to Marseille with suffocating tension. The camera captures the way the streets feel too loud, too fast, too bright after the cold grey silence of the mine. Bastien walks through markets buzzing with life, past fight posters still bearing his name, through alleys where people glance at him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, as if unsure whether they are seeing a ghost or a man who has crawled out of his own grave. His shoulders are hunched, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his breathing tight. A fighter who once commanded arenas now walks the streets like a hunted man, shrinking under the weight of his own presence. What makes this return so agonizing is that Marseille itself has changed, but Bastien's relationship with it has not. Every corner holds memories. Every gym, every street, every shadowed alley whispers of the man he used to be. The film uses Bastien's perspective to immerse us in his trauma. Flashes of the cage, the sound of the crowd's roar, the heavy thud of a body hitting the mat. These memories bleed into his reality, making the city feel like a maze of ghosts. Even though years have passed, Bastien feels as if the fight just ended yesterday, and Marseille feels as if it never stopped watching him. But his reluctance to return isn't just about facing the city, it's about facing himself. In the salt mine, he could pretend he was nothing. He could drown in labor and avoid the man in the mirror. But here, in Marseille, there are mirrors everywhere. There are people who remember him. There are fight clubs that still speak his name. There are criminals who remember the champion who once ruled the cage and wonder why he has returned. Marseille forces Bastien to stand face to face with the man he left behind. A man who killed, a man who broke, a man who ran. The film masterfully builds Bastien's internal struggle through quiet, suffocating shots, him pausing outside an old gym where he once trained, his fingers lightly tracing the weathered poster of his last fight, his gaze falling on children practicing moves he once perfected. His hands, those same hands that ended Enzo's life, now tremble not from fear, but from the unbearable knowledge of what they've done. There's a chilling irony in these moments. Bastien, the man who once fought for millions to see, now flinches at his own shadow. But what keeps him moving, what drags his reluctant feet through the streets of this unforgiving city, is Leo. Emma's words, her trust, her desperation, they gnaw at him, they anchor him to this mission. Bastien knows he may never forgive himself, but maybe, just maybe, saving Leo is a battle he is still worthy of fighting. And so, against every instinct to retreat, Bastien begins a slow, painful process, of navigating Marseille's dark underworld, a world of cage fights, dirty money, and children being swallowed by criminal empires. The beauty of this point is in its emotional layering. This is not a return driven by courage. It is driven by obligation, by guilt, by a flicker of something Bastian thought he lost purpose. And even though his back is straight and his fists are still powerful, the film makes it abundantly clear. Bastian is terrified. He is terrified of what he will find, terrified of failing Leo, but most of all, terrified of what he might become if he steps back into a world that feeds on violence. His reluctant return is the film's emotional pivot. It's the moment where exile ends and confrontation begins. It's not just a geographical return, it's a spiritual reckoning. The city that once crowned him a champion now challenges him to prove he can be something more. And so, step by trembling step, Bastian walks deeper into the city that broke him, carrying with him the unbearable hope that maybe, just maybe, this time he can fight for something that matters. As Bastien begins to navigate the tangled streets of Marseille in search of Leo, he is quickly confronted by the brutal reality that this mission is not a simple rescue. It is a war against a criminal empire that has no intention of letting him succeed. But in this battlefield of shadows and betrayal, he is not alone. Enter Captain Kenza Alaoui, one of the most complex, fearless, and layered characters in KO 2025. A woman whose mere presence challenges Bastian's worldview and whose own battles add a thunderous heartbeat to the story's pulse. Kenza is not introduced in the flashy, heroic manner that action films often use for police characters. There is no grand entrance, no gun blazing, no slow motion swagger. Instead, her introduction is quiet but sharp. She is seen methodically interrogating one of Abdelmansur's lower ranking enforcers, a voice calm but laced with a cold edge that instantly demands respect. She is the kind of cop who doesn't need to raise her voice to dominate a room. Her authority is not in her badge, it's in the precision of her words and the deadliness of her focus. The camera captures her with tight, deliberate frames, showing a woman who has long learned how to survive in a city that eats the weak and betrays the strong. When Kenza first crosses paths with Bastian, their meeting is laced with tension, mistrust, and the quiet hostility of two people who have both been burned by the system and by life. She knows who Bastian is. His reputation is a shadow that precedes him. In her eyes, he is a man who disappeared after killing someone in the cage, a man who abandoned his life when things became unbearable. Kenza doesn't trust him, and why should she? In her world, men like Bastian are predators, weapons, mercenaries who get people killed. She challenges him immediately, not with accusations but with razor sharp questions that cut directly to his purpose. Why now? Why do you care? Who are you here to save? Leo or yourself? What makes Kenza so compelling is her own internal war. She is a police captain navigating the crumbling remains of a system that has rotted from the inside. The police force she serves is infested with corruption. Officers who have sold their loyalty to Abdel, those who look the other way, while children disappear into the underworld. Kenza's job is not just to chase criminals, it's to survive inside a force where even her own colleagues might be enemies. She wears her strength like armor, but beneath it is a woman exhausted by years of fighting a war that seems unwinnable. And when she looks at Bastian, she sees a man who, despite his shame, might be desperate enough, angry enough, and skilled enough to actually tear through the web she has spent years circling. Their initial interactions are cold, clipped, transactional. Kenza demands answers, boundaries, and control. Bastian resists, dismissing her as a bureaucratic obstacle. But as their paths collide deeper in the criminal labyrinth, a fragile, reluctant partnership begins to form. Not because they trust each other, but because they are both fighting the same war from opposite ends. Bastian is driven by guilt, Kenza by duty. Bastian wants to save Leo. Kenza wants to burn the network to the ground. They both need each other, whether they admit it or not. The film beautifully constructs their relationship as one of gradual, painful trust. Kenza sees Bastian's brutal efficiency in the fight clubs, but she also sees the way he trembles after every confrontation, the way his fists close and open, as if he is terrified of the violence he still carries inside. Bastian, in turn, begins to see Kenza not as a rigid cop, but as a warrior who has sacrificed her own safety, her own reputation, her own life for the smallest chance of saving the children trapped in this city's vicious cycles. Kenza's own backstory is unveiled in layers. She has fought against the corruption in her department for years, and every victory she has gained has cost her something personal. Her family is gone, either by choice or by consequence. Her name is whispered in the halls with both fear and resentment. She stands as a lone beacon in a system that would rather see her broken. And yet, she keeps fighting. Not because she believes she will win, but because surrendering would mean becoming like the very men she despises. What makes Kenza and Bastian's connection so powerful is that they reflect each other's brokenness. Both have been chewed up and spit out by the worlds they once trusted. Both have spent years in isolation. Bastian in the salt mine, Kenza inside the decaying walls of her own department. And yet, both still choose to fight. Together, they form a partnership that is not based on heroism, but on survival, shared wounds, and the slim hope that maybe they can save at least one life before the darkness pulls them under. Kenza Alawi is not just a supporting character. She is the backbone of Bastian's journey. She is the one who challenges him, who holds him accountable, who forces him to confront whether he is saving Leo or for himself. And through her quiet strength, her relentless pursuit of justice, and her refusal to bend under the weight of a broken system, Kenza becomes one of the most unforgettable forces in KO 2025. A reminder that sometimes the strongest warriors are not those who fight in cages, but those who keep standing when everyone else has fallen. Daughter's Bastian digs deeper into the twisted web that has ensnared Leo. The dark, suffocating truth about Marseille's criminal empire begins to unfold. A vast, meticulously constructed network of underground violence, corruption, and power, ruled with cold precision by the shadowy figure known as Abdel Mansour. The brilliance of KO 2025 lies in how it doesn't present Abdel as the typical crime boss, barking orders from a gilded throne. Instead, he is portrayed as a phantom, always watching, always listening, but rarely seen. A man whose absence in the public eye only amplifies his control over the city. Abdel is not just a villain, he is the architect of a decaying ecosystem. His grip on Marseille is not through brute force alone, it's through the silent agreements he weaves with politicians, police officers, gym owners, fight promoters, and street level criminals. Every illegal cage fight, every drug shipment, every missing child is a thread in his empire's vast tapestry. Abdel's brilliance is that he doesn't control Marseille through fear alone. He controls it through debt, dependency, and the illusion of choice. Gym owners owe him money, politicians owe him favors, cops owe him silence. If you live in Marseille's underbelly, chances are you either work for Abdel or you're simply waiting for the moment when you will. The film paints this empire in cold, gritty detail. The illegal fight clubs are not the flashy, neon soaked arenas of underground fantasies. They are brutal, blood-stained cages buried in the basements of abandoned warehouses, deep in the shipyards, hidden behind fake storefronts. Boys as young as 12 are forced to fight while cigarette smoke chokes the air, and grown men place bets with dead eyes and fat wallets. These children are treated like disposable entertainment, cogs in Abdel's machine, valuable only so long as they keep bleeding for the crowd. Bastien walks into these fight dens not as a spectator, but as a man who sees ghosts of himself in every young fighter desperately throwing punches for survival. But Abdel's reach doesn't stop at the fight clubs. His influence oozes through Marseille like poison in the water. Local businesses pay protection money not out of fear of immediate violence, but out of fear of slow, systematic destruction if they dare to resist. Corrupt police officers escort his shipments. Judges look the other way when his enforcers are brought to trial. Even the media is carefully manipulated, silencing stories that threaten his operations. Abdel's power is not in being untouchable. It's in making sure that anyone who touches him quietly disappears without consequence. The film does not introduce Abdel immediately. Instead, his presence is built through whispers, half-heard warnings, the tightening of shoulders when his name is mentioned. He is a man who operates in layers. His voice is relayed through lieutenants, his orders passed like shadows in the dark. By the time Bastien finally glimpses him, the weight of his influence has already been carved into every street, every abandoned warehouse, every terrified fighter who knows they are nothing more than pawns in Abdel's empire. What makes Abdel so terrifying is his understanding of people's weaknesses. He doesn't just buy loyalty, he buys desperation. He finds the men who are drowning in debt, the parents whose children need surgery they can't afford, the gym owners trying to keep their doors open. He offers them lifelines, but every lifeline is a chain. Once you take his hand, you're his, and if you dare to resist later, he doesn't come after you. He comes after those you love. Abdel's cruelty is methodical. He doesn't rage, he doesn't threaten loudly. He simply removes people from existence with surgical silence. As Bastien navigates this empire, he begins to understand the impossible scale of the fight ahead. This is not a simple mission to pull Leo from danger. It is a war against a system that devours children. A system so deeply rooted that tearing at one thread risks unraveling the lives of hundreds. Bastien realizes that even if he finds Leo, escaping Abdel's grip will not be as simple as running. It will require burning through layers of protection, exposing corruption, and forcing a confrontation that will cost lives. But perhaps what shatters Bastien most is the recognition that he once thrived in this system. He once fought in rings sponsored by men like Abdel. He once soaked in the glory while never questioning where the money came from. The criminal empire that now sickens him is built in part on the blood, sweat, and victories he once proudly offered to the highest bidder. His hands are not clean. His guilt is not distant. It is personal. And that is why he cannot walk away. That is why this battle is not just to save Leo. It is to dismantle the kingdom he once helped build. Abdel's empire is not just a backdrop for Bastien's journey, it is a living organism, pulsing with corruption, breathing with violence, and feeding on the desperation of the people trapped within it. And the terrifying question that lingers over Bastien's every step is this: can one broken man, haunted by his past, truly stand against an empire built to consume him? As Bastien plunges deeper into Marseille's criminal labyrinth, he realizes that the only way to reach Leo is not by tearing down walls from the outside, it is by stepping back into the very world he fled, by willingly descending into the brutal underworld of illegal cage fighting that he once dominated. This is where KO 2025 takes a harrowing, visceral turn, not just a physical descent, but an emotional spiral where Bastien must confront the darkest version of himself, one punch at a time. Bastien's decision to re-enter the underground fight scene is not made with fire in his eyes or the thirst for glory. It is a reluctant, soul-crushing sacrifice. He knows that each step he takes back into this world chips away at what little humanity he has left. But it's the only door still open. These fight clubs are not accessible to outsiders. They are guarded, secretive, violent ecosystems where trust is currency and survival is the only language spoken. If Bastien wants to get close to the criminal inner circle that holds Leo captive, he must become one of them again. He must bleed for them, sweat for them, fight for them, and in doing so, risk becoming the monster he fears still lives inside him. The film's portrayal of these underground fights is brutal, raw, and stripped of the cinematic gloss often seen in fight movies. The cages are rusted, the floors sticky with old blood, the lights dim and flickering like the dying pulse of hope itself. The crowd is not cheering fans, they are predators, gamblers, criminals, and men who come not to watch art, but to feast on violence. Bastien enters this world not as a star, but as a fallen relic, a man who once ruled, now forced to claw his way back through blood-soaked ranks. His first fight is not a cinematic comeback. It is a horrifying collapse of self-control. The opponent is young, desperate, and fighting for his own survival, much like Bastien did years ago. As Bastien's fists collide with flesh, the memories of his fatal knockout surge through him like a tidal wave. His breathing stutters, his vision flickers, and for a terrifying moment he freezes, his mind transported back to Enzo's lifeless body on the mat. But the underground doesn't wait for hesitation. The fight is savage, chaotic, and relentless. Bastian is forced to push through his trauma, to finish the fight, not for victory, but to maintain his cover, to stay in the game long enough to find Leo. The emotional genius of this sequence lies in the way the film traps Bastian in a psychological prison. Every punch he throws drags him deeper into a pit of self-loathing. The crowd's roars echo like ghosts from his past, their cheers feeling like knives against his skin. The camera never lets us escape his perspective. The heavy breathing, the trembling fists, the crushing flashbacks all make the audience feel Bastian's suffocation as if we are locked in the cage with him. As he fights his way through the ranks, Bastian's reputation begins to echo once again through Marseille's streets. Whispers of his return reach the ears of Abdel's enforcers. His victories are noticed by the fight promoters, by the corrupt officials, and soon by Abdel himself. Bastian is intentionally building a path toward the center of the empire. But the closer he gets, the more he risks losing the part of himself that still wants to be saved. Kensa, watching from the edges, warns him. There's a line you can't uncross, Bastian. But Bastian is already drowning. For him, this is not just about saving Leo, it's about proving that his fists can finally protect rather than destroy. Yet the deeper he goes, the more the line between saving and destroying begins to blur. The underground fights become increasingly brutal, with Bastian facing opponents who are not just brawlers, they are killers, men trained to maim and humiliate. Each victory pulls him further into Abdel's orbit, earning the interest of men who want to use him, to bend him, to control him. Bastian begins to draw attention he cannot afford, but it's the only way forward. What makes these fight sequences so agonizing is the emotional war Bastian fights within himself. Every punch risks becoming the punch that haunts him. Every victory feels like a step away from redemption, not toward it. The violence that once defined him now feels like a betrayal of the very mission he's on. The fights aren't a triumph, they're a slow, brutal collapse of his moral defenses. The descent into the underground is not just about physical pain, it is about emotional suffocation. Bastian is forced to fight not just the men in front of him, but the ghosts behind him, the guilt pressing on his shoulders, and the gnawing question that tears at his soul. Is he saving Leo because it's the right thing to do, or because he wants to believe he's still worth saving? The descent is long, painful, and filled with brutal, unforgiving moments. The film makes it clear Bastian may find Leo, but whether he can climb back out of this world with his soul intact is a battle far more dangerous than any cage fight he's ever faced. As Bastian fights his way deeper into the brutal underground, KO 2025 begins to reveal one of the most devastating themes of the film, the unbearable psychological weight carried in Bastian's own fists. These hands, once celebrated by the world, have become his curse, his prison, and his greatest source of self-hatred. Every time he raps his knuckles, every time his fists tighten, Bastian is forced to confront the suffocating truth that his power is what destroyed his life. His hands, his weapons have taken a life, and now he must use them again, but this time with the crushing fear that he might kill again. The film doesn't let this weight fade into the background. It forces us to sit with Bastian's internal war in suffocating, agonizing detail. Every scene where he tapes his fists is filmed like a funeral ritual. His hands tremble as he pulls the tape tighter, as if the act itself tightens the noose around his neck. The sweat on his skin, the rhythm of his breath, the dull ache in his knuckles from old fractures, all serve as brutal reminders that he cannot separate who he is from what his fists can do. His strength, once a gift, now feels like a ticking bomb strapped to his own body. What makes Bastian's psychological descent so harrowing is that he isn't addicted to the violence, he's terrified of it. He doesn't step into the cage with the thrill of a warrior returning to battle. He steps in as a man who fears what will happen if he loses control. Every punch carries the question that haunts him relentlessly. What if this is the punch that kills again? And the cruelest irony is that he cannot afford to hold back. If he hesitates, if he pulls his punches, he dies. But if he unleashes his full strength, he risks becoming the monster he already believes he is. The film beautifully traps us inside his mind during these fights. Flashbacks of Enzo's lifeless body intercut with the present. The sound of the crowd distorts into the sound of flatlining heart monitors. The lights of the cage flicker and dissolve into the sterile brightness of the night he ended a man's life. Bastian's breathing grows labored, his vision narrows, his fists clench and unclench as if they are not part of him, as if they are separate entities capable of betraying him at any moment. He is suffocating under the crushing paradox of needing to use his fists to save Leo, while knowing that these same fists have already destroyed one life. Outside the ring, Bastian's hands betray him in more subtle, heartbreaking ways. He can't hold a glass of water without his fingers trembling. He flinches when people get too close, as if afraid of what his reflexes might do. He has moments where he stares at his own hands for agonizingly long beats, his breathing shallow, his eyes brimming with loathing. The weight of what he carries is not just physical, it is etched into his bones, wrapped around his muscles, burned into his skin. His hands are not simply tools of violence, they have become symbols of his identity. They are a constant reminder that he cannot outrun his past. Even when he wins, even when he survives the fights, he feels no victory. He feels shame, guilt, terror. He tapes his hands tighter, as if binding a beast inside him, as if the layers of tape can somehow restrain the violence he fears he cannot control. The brilliance of the film lies in the slow, suffocating build of this psychological pressure. Each fight chips away at Bastian's resolve. Each punch brings him closer to the edge of losing himself. He begins to question whether he is truly capable of saving Leo without becoming the very thing he despises. Can a man whose hands have already taken life really save another? Can violence be used for good, or does it only breed more violence? Kenza, seeing the war inside him, warns him again and again that he must not lose himself, that he must remember why he is fighting. But Bastian's silence speaks louder than her words. He is not sure he remembers who he was before the cage, before the knockout, before the guilt consumed him. The psychological weight of his fists becomes a physical burden as well. The old injuries in his hands begin to resurface, the fractures that never healed properly, the damaged tendons, the deep aches that pulse with every punch. The film subtly shows his hands swelling after each fight, his fingers bruised, his grip weakening. His strength is deteriorating, not because he's out of shape, but because his own body is slowly betraying him. His hands, both his weapon and his curse, are beginning to break under the strain. And yet, he cannot stop. He must keep fighting, must keep swinging, must keep using the very fists that haunt him, because the alternative is letting Leo be swallowed by the empire he's trying to dismantle. This is the devastating brilliance of KO 2025. It forces us to question whether a man can ever truly escape his own hands, whether he can use them to save without destroying, whether he can ever make peace with them. Bastian's fists are not just physical, they are the chains he wears every second of the film, the inescapable reminder that even when he fights for redemption, he must still wield the very power that damned him in the first place. Dot. As Bastian continues his brutal journey through Marseille's underworld, the road back to Leo forces him to face ghosts he never wanted to see again. Among them is perhaps the most emotionally shattering, his former trainer, Marc Duval, the man who not only forged him into a champion, but also unknowingly built the cage that would eventually imprison his soul. Marc is not just a footnote in Bastian's past, he is the architect of Bastian's rise, the man who taught him how to turn his fists into weapons, who taught him how to win at all costs, even when it meant crossing the invisible lines of morality. The film builds up to their reunion with agonizing precision. Bastien tracks Marc to a decaying gym buried in the industrial rot of Marseille's outskirts. A once proud temple of warriors, now reduced to a hollow shell where desperate boys throw wild punches for scraps of attention. The gym is no longer the cathedral of discipline it once was. The heavy bags are patched with duct tape, the walls cracked, the ring frayed and sagging. Time has passed, and it has not been kind. Yet Mark is still there, still training fighters, still preaching the gospel of brutality wrapped in the language of survival. When Bastian walks in, the gym seems to freeze. Mark, older, wearier, but still sharp eyed, turns slowly to face the man who vanished years ago, the man whose disappearance stained the gym's legacy with the blood of Enzo's death. The tension in this scene is a masterpiece of silence. There are no shouts, no theatrics, just two men standing in the ruins of everything they built together. Bastian's fists clench by his sides, his breathing heavy, not from fear of Mark, but from the tidal wave of memory crashing over him. Mark greets him not with anger, but with a bitter smile. A smile that says, "You finally came home." For Mark, Bastian's return is not a reckoning, it is inevitable. In Mark's eyes, men like Bastian don't get to escape. They don't get to live quietly in salt mines. They are built to fight, built to destroy, built to endure pain in the name of power. Mark sees the weight in Bastian's eyes, but he does not acknowledge the guilt, because guilt to Mark is a weakness, a luxury fighters cannot afford. Their conversation is a symphony of emotional complexity. Bastian accuses Mark of feeding him to the wolves, of shaping him into a weapon without a soul. But Mark, with chilling calm, reminds him that Bastian always had a choice. Mark didn't force him to step into the cage. Mark didn't force him to throw the punch that killed Enzo. Mark simply showed him the path to victory. Bastian chose to walk it. This argument lands like a hammer, because buried deep in Bastian's guilt is the horrifying truth that he did choose. He chose to win. He chose to destroy. And now, he is the one who must carry that burden. Mark's philosophy is both brutal and tragically persuasive. To him, the world is divided between predators and prey. There is no room for hesitation, for doubt, for regret. Survival demands sacrifice, glory demands blood. And Mark genuinely believes that what he gave Bastien was not a curse. It was the only way to survive in a city like Marseille. He tells Bastien that trying to save Leo is noble but naive. The system cannot be broken. The fight clubs will always exist. Abdel's empire is too entrenched. Even if Bastien pulls Leo out, there will always be another boy to replace him. But Bastien, exhausted and haunted, pushes back. He tells Mark that this isn't about saving the world. It's about saving one life. Just one. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the fight worth taking. For the first time, Bastien speaks not as a weapon, but as a man who is desperately clawing his way toward redemption. He no longer fights for belts or money or applause. He fights for the chance to protect, to atone, to finally break the cycle that Mark spent years justifying. The confrontation is not resolved with fists. It is resolved with words, with the brutal acknowledgement that Mark will never change. He will keep training boys to fight. He will keep feeding the machine. And yet, in a flicker of subtle complexity, Mark gives Bastien something: information about Leo's location, a map into the deeper layers of Abdel's network. Perhaps Mark does this out of guilt, perhaps out of respect, or perhaps in some small, cruel way, Mark simply wants to see what Bastien is truly capable of when he fights for something other than himself. This meeting fractures Bastien emotionally. Mark is a living reminder of the man Bastien used to be, the man he fears he might still be. Walking away from Mark is not a victory. It is a wound that Bastien will carry for the rest of his life. A painful severing from the man who made him, but who also broke him. Mark Duval is not just a side character. He is the ghost Bastien cannot outrun. He is the mirror that shows Bastien both who he was and who he might still become. And as Bastien leaves the gym, stepping back into the filthy streets with Mark's words echoing in his mind, the weight of the next steps presses even heavier on his shoulders. The path to saving Leo is clearer now, but the price of that path has never been higher. As Bastien edges closer to the heart of Abdel's criminal empire, he reaches a point where brute force and underground victories are no longer enough to advance. He must infiltrate the enemy's camp, not as an outsider seeking revenge, but as a soldier seemingly willing to serve. This is where the film shifts into a tense psychological chess game. forcing Bastien to navigate the most dangerous battlefield of all, deception. Through the brutal string of cage fights, Bastien's growing reputation begins to ripple through Marseille's underworld like wildfire. His name, once a ghost, now returns to the lips of the city's most dangerous men. Bastien understands this perfectly. His return to the spotlight isn't accidental, it's the bait. By violently clawing his way through the fight rankings, he intentionally draws the attention of Abdel's lieutenants, particularly Khaled, a ruthless enforcer and recruiter who manages Abdel's newest, most expendable fighters. Khaled approaches Bastien with carefully measured interest. He doesn't trust Bastien, but he recognizes usefulness when he sees it. Khaled extends a poisoned offer: fight for Abdel's most elite, exclusive underground circuit, a level of violence so depraved that the public dares not whisper its existence. Bastien knows this is the door he needs to step through to get closer to Leo, but to pass through it, he must convince Abdel's men that he is no longer a grieving, self-exiled fighter, but a man willing to kill for profit again. The tension here is suffocating. Bastien is now forced to walk the razor-thin edge between pretense and relapse. He must act the part of the predator without becoming one. He must fight viciously enough to maintain the illusion, but carefully enough to control the monster inside him. The film crafts these moments with surgical precision. Bastien sharing cold drinks with Abdel's men, sitting in dark warehouses where deals are struck, watching as children like Leo are bartered like disposable commodities. He listens in silence as Khaled boasts about profits made from broken boys in cages. Every second Bastien spends with them erodes another layer of his humanity. The alliance is not a partnership, it's a prison with gilded bars. Abdel's men give Bastien better fights, larger payoffs, but they also watch him relentlessly. The unspoken message is clear: you're either one of us or you're dead. Bastien plays the part with agonizing skill. Cold stares, wordless nods, ruthless beatdowns in the cage. But inside, his soul frays with every step he takes deeper into the snake pit. Kenza, operating from the shadows, watches in horror as Bastien sinks further into this role. She pleads with him to pull back, to not lose sight of who he is, to remember that Leo's rescue means nothing if Bastien becomes the very machine they are trying to dismantle. But Bastien remains trapped. Every lie he tells Abdel's men, every brutal fight he survives, tightens the noose. He can't stop now. He's too deep, too close. The brilliance of this point is in its relentless psychological corrosion. Bastien's mind is no longer just at war with guilt. It is now splintering under the weight of sustained deception. He begins to question his own motives. Is he pretending to be a killer again, or is he falling back into it? Are the carefully controlled knockouts truly controlled, or is he slipping? Abdel's inner circle, particularly Khaled, keep testing him, forcing him into increasingly savage scenarios. At one point, they push Bastien to the brink, demanding he execute a young fighter who failed to perform. This moment is the apex of Bastien's moral collapse. He stands over the trembling boy, fists tight, lungs burning, every nerve screaming at him to stop. Yet he knows that hesitation here will shatter his cover. To refuse means death, to comply means becoming the monster Mark once praised. But in a heart-stopping twist, Bastien stages the execution, delivering a knockout that mimics death but spares the boy's life. It's a masterstroke of deception, but it fractures Bastien even further. The crowd roars for blood, Abdel's men cheer his ruthlessness, and in that deafening moment, Bastien realizes he is now imprisoned in a role that may consume him entirely. The reluctant alliance with Abdel's circle is not just a plot device, it is a psychological descent, a suffocating dance where Bastien must trade pieces of his soul for inches of progress. Every handshake with Khaled, every brutal fight, every darkly lit deal pushes him closer to Leo, but further from the man he once hoped to become. The film's genius here is that it never lets us or Bastien breathe. The walls are always closing in. His fists are always soaked in blood. And the clock is always ticking, not just for Leo's rescue, but for Bastian's final chance at redemption. In this deadly alliance, Bastian doesn't just risk his life, he risks the very last threads of his identity. And as the next steps unfold, the horrifying question remains: will Bastian emerge from this alive? And if he does, will there be anything left of him worth saving? As Bastian digs deeper into Abdel's brutal empire, fighting tooth and nail to stay alive within the suffocating grip of the criminal underworld, the stakes of his mission suddenly crystallize in the most gut-wrenching and soul-piercing way. The revelation of Leo's true condition is not just a narrative twist, it is the emotional earthquake that shatters Bastian's already fragile resolve. Until this point, Bastian has fought under the belief that Leo is simply trapped, another lost boy swallowed by the fight clubs, a child who still has a chance to walk away, to heal, to live. But when Bastian finally discovers the truth, the weight of his mission nearly crushes him. Through his reluctant alliance with Abdel's lieutenants, Bastian finally earns access to the elite underground circuits, those backroom cages where fighters are not just commodities, but pawns in a much darker game of money and power. It is here, through whispered names, rigged fights, and illicit bets, that Bastian uncovers Leo's name on the roster. Not as a promising fighter in training, but as a child already broken, conditioned, and turned into a permanent fixture of the blood sport. The horrifying truth is unveiled when Bastian secretly witnesses one of Leo's fights from the shadows of the arena. The boy Bastian expected to find, a terrified, fragile child desperate for rescue, is nowhere to be seen. In his place stands a cold, mechanical shadow, a child who fights with terrifying precision, void of emotion, as if someone has stripped his humanity away piece by piece. Leo is not just surviving these fights, he is winning them, executing brutal moves far beyond his age, far beyond what should ever be expected from a child. His eyes are empty, his face expressionless, his body moving as if on cruel autopilot. The impact of this revelation is devastating. Bastian, who has fought so relentlessly to save Leo, now realizes that he is not racing to pull the boy back from the edge. He is fighting to bring him back from somewhere far beyond it. Abdel's network has not simply captured Leo. They have reprogrammed him. They have crushed his fear, replaced it with numbness, and conditioned him to see fighting as survival, as purpose, as the only language he knows. The film masterfully traps us in Bastian's emotional collapse during this sequence. The camera lingers on Bastian's trembling hands as he watches Leo, his vision blurring, his breath ragged. The sound design subtly shifts. The roar of the crowd becomes a distant hum. The sound of Leo's punches echo louder, sharper, drilling into Bastian's skull like thunder. The boy's fists are now his chains, just as Bastian's once were. In this harrowing moment, Bastian doesn't just see Leo, he sees himself. He sees the cycle he once served, he sees the boy he was, and the monster he became. Bastian's knees nearly buckle. His entire mission was built on the desperate hope that Leo could still be saved, that the boy's spirit, his innocence, could be salvaged. But what Bastian sees in that cage is something far more terrifying. A boy who no longer fears pain, who no longer registers empathy, who no longer fights to escape, but fights because he knows nothing else. The emotional weight of this realization is suffocating. Bastian spirals into guilt, consumed by the horrifying thought that he may have arrived too late. Did his years of hiding in the salt mine allow this transformation to happen? If he had returned sooner, would Leo still be whole? The film brilliantly amplifies this internal collapse. Bastian's breathing accelerates, flashbacks of Enzo's death now violently intercut with Leo's cold mechanical movements, blending past and present in a dizzying storm of guilt and panic. Kenza finds Bastian outside the fight venue, nearly collapsed against a wall, trembling, suffocating under the weight of what he has seen. She tries to pull him back, tries to anchor him to the mission, but Bastian's words are fractured, almost childlike. "I'm too late. I'm too late. They've already made him like me." The depth of his despair is paralyzing, because he doesn't just fear that Leo is lost, he fears that Leo has become the next link in the chain Bastian spent years helping to forge. This moment is the film's emotional cliff, a place where Bastian must now ask himself a brutal, soul crushing question. Is it possible to save someone who no longer believes they need saving? Can he reach the boy buried beneath years of psychological conditioning, beneath layers of forced violence and emotional numbness? Can he drag Leo back from a place Bastian himself barely escaped? The genius of KO 2025 is that it does not offer easy answers. The revelation of Leo's condition does not spark a triumphant call to arms. It drowns Bastian in a storm of self doubt, guilt, and the terrifying realization that this mission may not have a clean ending. Saving Leo might not mean pulling him out of the fight. It might mean facing the horrifying possibility that Leo may not want to be saved at all. Bastian's next steps now carry unbearable weight. He must confront not just Abdel's empire, but Leo himself, a boy who may no longer remember life before the cage, a boy whose fists have become his only language, a boy who has, in many ways, become a reflection of Bastian's worst nightmares. The tension that has been simmering throughout KO 2025 finally erupts into its most emotionally harrowing and psychologically devastating moment, the direct face-to-face confrontation between Bastian and Leo. This is not the grand slow-motion reunion of a lost guardian rescuing an innocent child. No. The film, with chilling brilliance, presents this moment as a collision. Two broken warriors meeting across the battlefield of their shared pain, bound by blood but divided by the cages that have shaped them. Bastian fights his way to Leo's holding quarters, deep inside Abdel's fortress of underground arenas. The journey to get there is nothing short of a warpath. Fights, betrayals, close escapes, brutal confrontations with Abdel's guards and lieutenants. But none of these physical battles prepare Bastian for the soul-crushing weight of what he's about to face. The boy he has risked everything to save does not look at him with gratitude or relief. Leo looks at him with cold indifference. When Bastian finally lays eyes on Leo up close, the boy stands in the dimly lit preparation room, wrapping his own hands with the silent precision of someone who no longer needs help. His movements are methodical, his posture tense but practiced. The most haunting detail is his eyes, vacant, unreadable, trained to reveal nothing. Bastian calls out his name, expecting a flicker of recognition, a crack in the hardened shell. But Leo simply tightens the tape on his wrists and responds with chilling detachment. Why are you here? The emotional devastation of this moment is brutal. Bastian's entire mission was built on the hope that Leo still remembered him, that some fragment of trust or familial bond had survived the years. But instead, he finds a boy who has buried his past so deeply that he no longer reaches for rescue. He only reaches for his fists. The conversation that follows is not a heartfelt reunion. It is a battlefield of painful silences and brutal truths. Bastian pleads, his voice cracking, trying to remind Leo of who he was, of their life before the cages, before Abdel's network stole him. He speaks of the sea, of childhood games, of the promises he made to protect him. But Leo stares at him, unmoved, his voice sharp and cold. You didn't protect me. You left. You disappeared. This is who I am now. This is what I know. The depth of Leo's psychological conditioning is unbearable to watch. The boy has not simply adapted to this world. He has embraced it as his identity. Abdel's empire has twisted him into a fighter who believes violence is not a means to an end. It is the end itself. Leo doesn't want to escape. He doesn't even believe escape is possible. In his mind, the cage is his home. The cheers, the pain, the blood, that is where he feels alive. Bastian tries to explain, to confess his guilt, to tell Leo about the years he spent in exile, punishing himself for the knockout that cost a life. But Leo cuts him down with a single, soul-shattering sentence. You're not here for me. You're here for yourself. You want to feel better. You want me to save you. This line stabs through Bastian's heart like a blade, exposing the darkest corner of his soul. The unbearable question of whether his mission was ever about Leo, or whether it was always about seeking his own redemption. The film lingers in this moment with agonizing intensity. The silence between them is louder than any fight, any gunshot, any scream. Bastian's face crumples under the weight of that accusation because he cannot deny it. He wants to save Leo, yes, but he also wants to save himself, to claw back some fragment of his soul from the abyss. The confrontation takes a brutal physical turn when Abdel's men, sensing Bastian's emotional fracture, force the unthinkable. Bastien and Leo must now fight each other in the cage. It is staged as a cruel spectacle, a test of loyalty, a punishment disguised as entertainment. Abdel's empire demands that Bastien prove himself, and the boy he came to save is no longer an innocent to rescue, he is now his opponent. The fight is not a battle of skill, it is a devastating collapse of everything Bastien has tried to protect. He refuses to fight back, refuses to strike Leo, even as the boy, conditioned to survive, launches brutal mechanical assaults. Each punch Leo lands is not just a physical blow, it is a cry from the broken depths of a child who believes this is all he is, all he will ever be. Bastien drops to his knees in the cage, bloodied, breathing ragged, arms open, refusing to defend himself. If this is who you are now, then hit me, kill me, but I won't be the one to destroy you. The entire arena falls silent, waiting, hanging on Leo's decision. This is the emotional apex of KO 2025. Leo, fist trembling, breathing heavy, stands over Bastien, trapped in the horrifying choice between completing the fight or stepping out of the only identity he has ever known. The confrontation between Bastien and Leo is not about victory or defeat. It is about whether redemption is even possible when the damage has already been done. It is about whether love can survive in a world that has trained its children to destroy. The fight ends not with a knockout, but with a single shattering moment where Leo's fists lower, his breathing slows, and for the briefest flicker of time, the boy surfaces beneath the fighter. The path to salvation has been cracked open, but whether it can ever fully be walked remains a question that will haunt both Bastien and the audience until the very end. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this deep breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for more movie stories, behind the scenes facts, and fan theories right here on Real Talk Cinema. Catch you in the next one. Until then, keep it real.